Morning, Peter.
Good morning, Debra. Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, welcome, listeners. Welcome to the podcast. I always forget that hopefully we've got people listening because I can only see you and Jose. So how's it all going? There's the house move, which has been a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, well, we've got this horrible situation where we haven't quite exchanged contracts, but we are all in to complete and move in early August, and the removal men, the complication of going 175 miles with, one fewer cat than we had, but it's still complicated. So I still kind of fear that something's going to go wrong, but as you can see from my backdrop, things are disappearing from the walls.
Yes, I was going to say.
We're surrounded with cardboard boxes. I was down in Somerset for a couple of days earlier this week, and I visited the house which we are buying, and thankfully, I still thought this would be a nice place to live. I'm slightly worried I was going to get there and think, oh my goodness, what have we done? But they're surrounded by boxes as well, and it's just this kind of relentless complexity of the chain, and people getting their pieces of paper into the right places, and the deposits moving up and down the line. It's really really difficult.
It's one of the things I think that I cannot understand why somebody somewhere, possibly the government, I don't know, doesn't get a grip of the absolute monstrosity that is buying or selling a house in the UK.
Yeah.
Because it's just awful for absolutely everybody. I don't think I've ever come across anybody where it went through straightforwardly.
No.
Apart from when we bought this house, and we were lucky because we were first-time buyers, and this house was it was being held in a bridging loan by a company. I think it was Boots, and they just wanted to get a shot of it. So we didn't have all of the nightmare of chains and things like that, but that's super rare.
Well, I've heard enough kind of horror stories to wish that most people at my age, my kind of time of life and stage would be downsizing to somewhere less complicated, moving out of the southeast to somewhere a bit cheaper. And we aren't really doing that. We need every penny to make all of this work, to move to a place which is essentially there's going to be me and Lady W in one bit of the house, her sister in the annex, and one less junior living upstairs, and you've got all these kind of moving, so getting something, well, at least as big, if not bigger than where we are now, but with these other complications. Anyway, I'm sure that our listeners don't really want to hear about my troubles and anxieties on that front, but it makes running the NSPCC extremely simple compared with this.
Go on.
No, I was just going to ask you what you've been up to and how kind of working life was.
Well, terribly exciting, Peter. I must tell you about the launch of the Covenant, which I attended last week, which was a very hilarious thing. It's kind of because the lead up to it is that, so originally the government said they wanted to launch the compact in February, and there were delays and all the rest of it. And also the other thing was they kind of owning it very much themselves. So although we were inputting, we weren't really getting sight, those of us who had engaged, getting sight of the final document or anything like that. And the first we heard that it was being launched, and even then it was rumour, was when some of us suddenly got an invitation, and the invitation basically said you're invited on the 17th thing to a government summit. Please let us know if you can come. So no agenda, no idea of who was speaking, no idea of what it was actually for. Nothing, just completely secret. Anyway, so of course, rumour was that it was launching the Covenant. So of course, we all said yes. But it's the secrecy around it was absolutely hilarious. We didn't actually find out the venue until the day before at 8:00, and it was the next morning. And we didn't get the agenda until when we turned up. So we had absolutely no idea actually what we were turning up to. Mind you, having said all that, I can kind of get now all the secrecy, given that there was the Prime Minister, 5 cabinet ministers, 11 ministers, sundry MPs and senior civil servants all in this room at the Science Museum. But it was I've never experienced things like that. I'd be saying I'm going to a secret summit. I can't tell you what it's about or who's going to be there, but otherwise I'll have to kill you. It just really felt so much like that. And I know it's not uncommon for it to happen. It was a bit the same last year when the civil society leaders were summoned to a thing with Sir Keir Starmer, but still, it just made me chortle, Peter. But anyway,
especially when you were off to talk about partnership and collaboration as a key principle of how to work together and understand one another.
Absolutely, it was so funny. But anyway, and of course we had no idea who was going to be there. So we didn't for sure know it'd be the Prime Minister. We suspected it, but it was. So Elisa Nandy, obviously Secretary of State for DCMS, the Prime Minister, Wes Streeting was there, Bridget Phillipson, Jess Phillips, Darren Jones from the Treasury, who else? Georgia Gould, Minister for Scotland, who was incredibly impressive, I have to say. Like, she was like really, really engaging and powerful speaker, whose name is, I want to say, it's gone out of my head completely. How useless am I? Anyway, it'll be a test for our listeners to go and look up who's the Minister for Scotland. But anyway, so it was interesting. So the Prime Minister launched the Covenant. Well, what was also really interesting is when we got there were these things on the table with a QR code. And if you scanned the QR code, it was supposed to take you to the Covenant. But it didn't work until after the Prime Minister had spoken.
Right.
So we still didn't know what was in the Covenant, in the final Covenant. So anyway, yeah, so that was all quite exciting leading up to it. And of course, terribly glamorous to be in a room with all those major political figures, and obviously a really clear indication of how committed the government is to it. Because, I can't even imagine how you coordinate the diaries of 5 cabinet ministers, 11 ministers, and the Prime Minister to be in the same place at more or less the same time on this, So I think that was a real measure of their commitment to it. However,
they could have done it in the margins of a cabinet meeting. They all come together once a week. But I know what you mean. And in the old days, of course, people used to talk about Labour and the unions and beer and sandwiches. So what is what's the menu for civil society and government coming together? What's the modern day equivalent of beer and sandwiches? Canapes and glass of prosecco.
Well, it was so at lunchtime. It was. I think they don't call it finger food, but so they're tiny. To be honest, we were starving. The food was really tasty. It was provided by a charity called Clink.
Oh, good.
Yes. And it was really tasty, but there just wasn't enough on it. And the whole logistics of that. So most of us were absolutely famished and feeling quite faint in the afternoon. And at the end of the day, there was a drinks reception with a DJ, of all things.
Oh.
And from between 5 and 7. So you sort of think were they actually expecting anybody to dance? I don't know. Yeah, it was funny. No, so I think it's slightly posher now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah. And all vegan, which was very good. So you didn't have to, actually, no, it wasn't all vegan. There was some chicken, I think, somewhere. Anyway. Yeah. So that was all the foo-far and fanfare around the actual launch of it. But of course, that's the most important part. The most important part is what's in the Covenant, what it says, and whether it's deliverable. I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at it, Peter, at all.
I have.
It's very new, so.
Yeah, so I understand there are 4 principles. So there's recognition and value. So making quite a big deal about respecting the independence of the charity sector and its ability to campaign and disagree with the government without facing penalties in funding. The partnership and collaboration principle, which doesn't seem to have been followed through in the organisation and delivery of the event. I do accept there are some exceptional circumstances there, but there's going to be a lot of work to be done, I think, to build mutual understanding and respect of one another there. The third principle around participation and inclusion, and that sounds really reassuring and important at a time when a lot of the organizations and individuals working in that space must feel threatened by the kind of wave of stuff that has been coming across the Atlantic. And then the fourth principle about transparency and data and feedback on policy and fundraising. So it sounds pretty good in principle. I worry a little bit that there's a sort of default assumption among some people in the left of politics and some people in civil society that the ultimate end is for the state to fund everything. And that some of this is about understanding what the government is going to pay for and how it's going to pay for it. And I personally, really enjoyed working for a charity that was overwhelmingly funded from places other than government. And I think it would be a shame if we end up with, the Scouts being funded by the government or the lifeboats being funded by the government. There will be some debate about where the line is drawn. But I suppose I have been a little bit, and also slightly influenced by Keir Starmer appeared before a committee.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was last week or this week, where he was challenged about this sort of stuff, and the apparent inconsistency between wanting to work in collaboration with civil society on the one hand and then whacking them with a massive great national insurance bill on the other. And what did he make of that? And his defence wasn't to, in a principled sense, explain why the government needed a certain amount of money to reassure the markets, keep the show on the road, not spend even more than it was able to raise in tax at the moment. But the kind of defence was, well, we've already let off half the charities from national insurance. Well, the only kind of logic that you can draw for that is for the other half to be very upset and annoyed. Yeah. So I feel that is a bit of a conundrum, and some of these principles and the ways in which they are described seem to be still about what civil society can do for government to help government achieve what it wants to achieve, as opposed to what, as a nation, are we seeking to deliver, and how can we unleash this kind of energy in communities for people to do what really matters to them, with encouragement and support from the government. And yes, from time to time that will be kind of grants and contracts, but it's so much more. And until senior civil servants and ministers can kind of see that the end game of this is not to kind of nationalize all do-gooding.
Yeah.
I'm a bit skeptical there.
Well, I'm skeptical in a different way. I don't think there'll be any money coming with this at all. And I actually think, and I'm not cynical. So listeners, listen, I can't bear cynicism. I think cynicism is pointless. Cynical people sit around just bitching and whinging and not doing anything. So I'm not interested in cynics. But healthy skepticism, I think, is a good thing, to not be paralyzed into inaction. And the thing for me about it is a couple of things, I think. So firstly, I think that there is an assumption within large parts of the party and the government that civil society will automatically be on the side of a Labour government. So there's this kind of assumption that, we're all about being kind to people and therefore we're on your side. And that simply isn't true. Charities are on the side of their beneficiaries, and they will not be on the side of any government that does anything to damage their beneficiaries. And we've actually already seen that under this Labour government. The second thing I think is that, I think you're right in it's about what can civil society do for government, because I think the it's not that stupid. And governments know that charities and their volunteers and their workers turn up regardless of how much money you give them. We will always, always find a way to serve people in need. And I think that they're maximising, or they're trying to tap into that with look, we're going to cut all this money. None of this is explicit, by the way. This is just simply my skeptical brain looking at the situation. But we're not going to, we haven't got any money, which I absolutely hate, by the way, because it's not true. There's plenty of money. It's just a question of where you prioritise it. But anyway, we haven't got any money, so therefore we're not going to fund civil society. But we know civil society will step up, and what we'll do is we'll keep them happy by saying, we'll include you in decision making and stuff like that. So I would be gobsmacked if any money comes with this. And I think the proof is in the pudding with exactly the point that you made, Peter, about Keir Starmer saying, well, half the charities have got it. It's like literally days after the compact was launched, instant dismissal of the work of those charities and the crisis that the ENICS has put on a lot of charities, particularly the larger ones. So but I'm not cynical about it. I think it's good to have principles. We've got something that we can wave at people. If they're not doing, we can say, well, look, it clearly says here in this thing, but it doesn't have any teeth.
And there's going to be a council, isn't there, with people from civil society on it alongside. Yeah. So I think that could be really good, because that would be a place to have those conversations. And as you say, something which can hold particular bits of government to account if they behave inconsistently. What do you think about what do you think about it in the context of civil society organisations with aspirations to deliver significant services in places where the government currently spends an awful lot of money on services, but overwhelmingly with the private sector in what we would argue is too often a kind of short-term profiteering.
You mean care homes, children's homes, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
No, it's never ever made any sense to me why, if you have a choice between a charitable organisation and a private sector organisation to spend taxpayers' money on to provide a service, why the hell you would give it to a private organisation? Because they're going to take some of that taxpayer money as profit. Of course they are, and so they should. They're a private sector company; it's their job to make profit. But for me, that's a really skewed way of thinking about how you spend my tax money. I've never understood why you would spend taxpayers' money on the private sector if there is a civil society provider who can do just as good a job, which they usually can.
Because one would argue that the argument would be that they would deliver better value for money, better outcomes over a finite period of time. Well, I don't think it is automatic.
I don't think there's evidence of that, though, Peter. That's the trouble. And in fact, most of the evidence we see is where things are badly run, or where they walk away because there's not enough profit in anymore, and people and we see that in all, not just in care provision. We see that in all sorts of other employment services and stuff like that, where private sector companies got the work, got the job, did it until they didn't make any money anymore, and then just abandoned the whole thing. And I'm not convinced.
I have seen that. No, I have seen that happen, and I have felt a victim to contracts that happened exactly in the way you've described, and we've talked about that in the podcast a bit in the past. But I don't personally automatically think that a civil society organisation is going to deliver better outcomes than a private sector organisation that can also generate some profit, but it does have to be proven, and the measures which are used and the time frames for the contracts and the way in which civil society organisations are expected to kind of suck up all the bid costs to go for these things when they aren't organised in the same way to operate, to go for lots and lots of these. So if as a consequence of the partnership and collaboration, there is a way of which our sorts of organisations are given a really kind of fair crack of the whip and spend less time competing with one another and more time delivering the outcomes. That could be really good, and that doesn't need more money, as you say. It needs the money to be spent more intelligently.
When I sat on the SOC committee a long time ago now, and we had and this was around about the time that the then Labour government had decided that they would open up the space for grants to become contracts. And so the private sector could tender for stuff that traditionally been delivered by either the local authority itself or by civil society. And we had, as we were consulting about what the new SOC should look like, we had quite a few submissions, particularly for some larger charities, saying, could we reduce the requirements for transparency in the accounts, because they were competing against private sector companies who didn't have to, aren't required by law to give anywhere near the same level of detail as we were in charity accounts. Now, we said at the time, no, it's the answer to this is not to be less transparent. The answer to this is to campaign to make companies' accounts more transparent and more open to the public. But that's what it makes me think of, you see, because they talk about transparency and all the rest of it. But I'd be interested to see if they now say, okay, if you've got a private sector provider and a charitable sector provider bidding for a contract, whether at local level or at national level, what we want to see is we want both sides to give the same amount of open information. So all the information that's in the charities accounts, that's basically competition info for competition, needs to also be open from the business side. That would be really properly working partnership and equity. And I just get a sense this is more about, I know I'm sounding cynical. I'm really not cynical. It's just, we went through the compact, Peter, and whilst there are pockets of the country where the compact did work and actually is still kind of in place, it requires a real willingness and a proper commitment on the behalf of individual human beings.
Yeah.
And the problem with these sorts of promises is that if they don't come with teeth, if they don't come with, here's an example of what will happen if you don't do this, this is what, this is the action the government will take or whatever. If it doesn't come with that, it relies very much on people thinking, oh, I like this idea, let's do it, because it's not enshrined in anything. And I think that's the real problem with this, because if you think about it, the compact was all exciting at the time when it was launched back in, when was it, 2005, 2008? No, I can't even remember. But anyway, all those decades ago when the compact was launched, we were really excited about it. And of course, as soon as there's a change of government, what happened to the compact? Completely disappeared. So so all that will happen with this covenant is that if Labour don't win the next election, this covenant will only have been useful for 4 years. And so that's the thing. I think it ought to be underpinned by something. I don't know what the regulatory or legislative or whatever mechanism is, but by something that doesn't make it that easy for a new government just to say, we can't be asked with this, let's dump it. So I think those things around the sides are big missings, which makes this not feel particularly stable to me.
Yes. And then putting a positive spin on it, in the meantime, if this creates the platform for more productive and engaging relationships between leaders in government and civil society to debate more intelligently the desired outcomes from services which they are working on either in parallel or together, that would be helpful. So it was lovely that Childline got some money from the government, but it was also frustrating, but became less frustrating the more you engaged with people who knew and understand what you're trying to do, that a measure of success is not ending every contact 11 minutes, 13 minutes or whatever. I mean, you deliver what you need in the time required to get the child to the place where they need to arrive at next. And so productivity that's measuring inputs of kind of time is not the kind of currency to work on. But if you're letting a contract from government, that's your sort of starting point. So lots of conversations that are understanding and appreciating outcomes and impact for real people in a variety of real contexts. That must be a good thing. What do you think? Go on.
It's interesting you say this, because one of my trustees, a chap called Andrew Perkis, who's just a marvellous man. But anyway, he wrote a very interesting take on the covenant, which actually I hadn't particularly considered. But he said that it's a covenant between civil society and government. And so there's things we expect from government. There's also things we expect from civil society. And one of the things it says in the covenant is about, although they respect our right to campaign, etc., we need to respect the fact that they will have different priorities. And we need to understand that they'll have different priorities. And Andrew was saying the problem with that is, it's like it's not our job to stop campaigning for our cause because it doesn't happen to be on the top of the government's wish list at that moment. He said so the implication is that if you're campaigning for, I don't know, access to better support for children with autism under the age of 5, if that's what you're campaigning for, but the government says right now that's don't keep campaigning about this, we're not going to change any legislation, we're not going to do anything, we're focusing on something else, the implication is that the charities campaigning for that will just shut up and go away. But actually they can't, because their duty as trustees in law is to do what they need to do in order to serve their beneficiaries and meet the public benefit. So I suspect there might well be some clashes down the line when civil society organisations themselves go after government and say, you really must be prioritising this. And they're saying, well, we're not. And in the covenant, it says, you will understand. And we're like, well, we do understand. We're not stopping campaigning. So I should be interested to see how that sort of plays out.
Yeah. I think we've had this conversation before about the difference between single issue campaigning and achieving system change. And I think to achieve system change from a public policy perspective, you have to make choices. So, but maybe it is reassuring in what the covenant says about respecting the independence of charities to make that sort of noise, that we acknowledge you will continue to make that noise because that is your purpose, but you need to acknowledge that we can't do everything all the time 100%, and then that comes back to having really clear kind of communications. And and I think it requires something better than just saying on the national insurance thing, well, we've done it for half of you, because that just leaves it hanging, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
As opposed to we have made a strategic choice that for whatever reason, it's is it because the hospices shouted the loudest, or is it because the issue there is so desperate, or what? But you've made a choice, and if the only line you can draw is affordability, then the implication is one day we'll have more money and we'll do it for all of you. And the fact is that's never going to happen because there's so little money, so little available money until we start organising and spending it in a radically different way. Which the covenant does. Sounds like it offers the potential to have some respectful conversations about how that could be done. But we're a million miles away from that at the moment. And what do you think about? I mean, it seems to have gone down extremely well. The stuff about we won't penalise charities for campaigning and all of that. No, I never particularly felt fearful about that. I mean, okay, I wasn't operating in a really contentious party political area, but I still felt it was. There are ways in which you can tell truth to power, both publicly and privately. That this it clearly is hugely important to some people in the sector, and I always thought it was a little bit of a red herring.
But it's not, Peter. It's about power. So if you cast your days, so when you're a big national charity, it's much easier to be critical of the government for all sorts. Firstly, because you have some kind of, so you're not necessarily reliant on them for your income. Secondly, you just have more power. If the chief executive of the NSPCC asks to speak to a minister, they're likely to say yes. The challenge is for the vast majority of the sector where they're operating at local level, and where if they criticise their local authority, they criticise a particular decision that's been made, it's a very, very good chance it will be held against them because they're smaller communities, they know people. And so the fear it's not an unfounded fear at local charity level. And it happens a lot, Peter. It generally just happens a lot. It depends, of course, on the council and all the rest of it. But, they're having plenty of times when people have come and spoken to me about the fact they've lost a piece of funding because they had criticised the decision that the council had made about something else. And of course, the council always said it had nothing to do with that. As we just decided to go in a different direction or whatever. But you never totally believe that. So smaller charities are incredibly vulnerable, and particularly those smaller charities who are reliant on government funding, because the sorts of work that they do, state funding, is not particularly popular with the public, and it's not particularly popular with necessarily trusts and foundations. So the local authority is the only ones who'll fund the drug, addiction charities or the homeless. Do you know what I mean? It's like those charities, much harder to raise money from the public. So some charities have no choice but to be reliant on state funding to do their work because they're the only ones who pay. And so that is a real
that's good. Yeah, well, that's excellent. So there again, thinking positively, the government has created a really distinctly different context in which to examine some of those real issues, particularly at a local level, and it will be interesting to see how the Covenant Council, nationally and locally, face up to some of these real issues, or if they just explain them away.
Is a charity will criticise a local council or a local authority. The local authority will then take the funding away. When they're challenged about it, so the charity then has got to cope because they don't have that money. When challenged about it, they'll say it had nothing to do with what they were saying. It was to do with cost controls, or we thought the other organisation had a better track record, or, we've been funding them. So they will have plausible reasons why they took that funding away. So that's the reality of how the thing will work, because it's got no teeth. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So charities, so this covenant will not necessarily make smaller local charities more open and more critical of government, for sure. But that's always been the case. It's about human beings, about human nature. It's all, this isn't about people being weak or pathetic. It's not even about other people being, we have egos. People that hurt us. Why would we help you, But that's why I think that what will be really interesting to see, as you say, is what the joint council does, what the covenant, but also I think this is where the infrastructure bodies have a big, big part to play, particularly local CVSs, membership bodies like NCVO, Akiva and things like that, where they can represent members' views. So they do have the power and the welly to go and say, this is not okay. So I suspect that what might happen is charities might rely more on their CVSs to make their points for them, because it's risky for them. So I don't think it's going to take away any of that underlying human behaviour. But listen, I'm really conscious that I've sounded negative about it. I genuinely not. I think it's a really good step in the right direction. I think we've got a piece of paper to wave at people. I think they're clearly committed to it. I just don't think it's a panacea. And I think we've got to really keep a close eye on it. And the honest truth is this covenant will only last as long as this government does.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, probably. But that's back to trying to make the most of this while it's fresh and people remember it, isn't it? As opposed to coming along in a year's time when someone's done an annual report and So we don't know yet who's going to be on the
don't
council,
even know
do
what
we?
the selection process is. Don't know how they're going to decide who sits on it.
Yeah.
Well, at least I definitely don't know that. There may well be my colleagues who have got an inside track, but I definitely don't know how that's going to be decided.
That'll be interesting. I mean, listening to you, it'd be really important to have some really diverse insights from different locations, really crunchy, challenging issues where the government and civil society aren't necessarily going to line up with one another. But then it's really hazardous for those people that take those roles. And I have been there, and it's really you can't speak for the sector.
No, you can't.
Really.
No.
You can through your experiences and conversations like this, appreciate better than you otherwise might what it's like for Kevin Curley used to call the sector a loose and baggy monster or something, didn't he? And that's somehow you got to kind of appreciate that and make sure that the points you make are sufficiently referenced in the range of experience and not all coming back to your own particular cause and location and size of charity. So it'd be interesting to see how big the council is, who they pick, and what
mechanisms
we can do to empower those individuals to feel confident to express a range of views and feel we are being well served by them in the contribution they're making. It's not an easy job to take on, whoever gets those seats around the table, I think.
Indeed, and there'll be big expectations on them, a bit like, as we're coming to the end, a bit like the expectations on Sabina Wiegman and the England team in the final on Sunday, again against Spain. We lost to Spain in the World. So listeners, you can't see this, but Jose, our podcast producer, is Spanish, and he's like waving his fists in the air. I think, Jose, it's our turn to win. Okay. But yes, big expectations.
They've been a couple of very exciting games, haven't they? And great kind of lessons in resilience and not giving up.
Comeback. Well, it's also because people have said, the England team, it's all been very messy. The whole performance has been like hit and miss, but that's life. It's like, they've got to the finals. Does it really matter the erratic manner with which they got there? I don't know that it does, to be honest.
No, and it's a game of, it's not even a game of 90 minutes because I think they scored in the 96th minute or something.
Yeah. But no, it's now. Well, based on last night and the England game, there's a game of 120 minutes. Spain just narrowly escaped having to go to penalty shootouts, to be fair, whereas we got penalty. So the game is clearly yes. Anyway, on that note, good luck to England. And if England don't win, Jose, I'm very proud of Spain. But I will, of course, be rooting for England. And good luck with the whole house move and, all of that, Peter.
Yes. Well, when we record next week's episode, if we haven't exchanged contracts by then, I think we're going to be in some difficulty. But we shall see.
Well, I think my fingers crossed for you.
Very good. And I'm heading off to London now, and I'm doing my first public appearance as the chair of the Five Rights Foundation. So I need to go and brief myself up on
and practice.
What to say. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Take care.
Everybody.
Bye.